Hello, I'm Cyrus Shakir, Associate Professor in Learning and Teaching at Leeds Trinity University. I'm here to talk to you about addressing the awarding gap through anti-racist practice. Now, these two things are intrinsically linked. In my view and in my experience, you can't address the awarding gap, which is a race and ethnicity issue, without embedding and implementing anti-racist practice. So we have to begin with getting everybody on board in becoming anti-racist. It's not enough to just be not racist. We have to be anti-racist. And being anti-racist means taking categorical actions to address racial discrimination and challenging inequity where we see it. Now, the awarding gap is a pernicious, wicked issue, which unfortunately disproportionately affects students from BAME, Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds. We have a moral and ethical obligation to address the awarding gap within higher education. And in order to do that, we have to become anti-racist. So that's all of us being accountable, acknowledging our own privileges, our own lived experiences, our identity, our own biases, and our internal prejudices or stereotypes, and challenging these things and developing a journey of self-reflection to become a socially just, conscious person and individual in the higher education community. If we do this together in unity, in solidarity, then I think we can build a real community of practice to address the awarding gap and becoming anti-racist university. We have to acknowledge the power dynamics that often exist between educators and students and build a community together with our students. If we want to get to the heart of what the problem is that's causing the awarding gap, which it's multifaceted and extremely complex, we need to start off by speaking to those who it affects, and that is our students. That is often our minoritized students. So let's dismantle those power structures and start speaking and hearing from our students. Let's listen and value their lived experiences and use that to shape and direct actions to address the awarding gap. Let's build that proper community and that family of practice to address this horrible issue. So this would be my starting point in terms of addressing the awarding gap at university.
Hi there, my name's Andy Bryant. I'm the Head of Access, Participation and Outcomes, which is a really fancy title, and I currently work in the Office of Institutional Equity. The main part of my role is to oversee and regulate Leeds Trinity University's Access and Participation Plan. So within the Access and Participation Plan, we've got a number of different activities and strategies that aim to reduce the continuation, attainment and the awarding gap here at Leeds Trinity University that we see in the sector as a whole. And so there are probably a multitude of different reasons that contribute towards that awarding gap. But on a personal level, I still teach where I can here at Leeds Trinity University. And the way that I do my teaching through a relational pedagogical approach is to use my own lived experiences. So prior to becoming a teacher or a lecturer here at Leeds Trinity University, I spent 15 years in the youth justice system working with some of the most deprived and marginalised children in the city of Leeds. And then prior to that, I spent time incarcerated in the prison system from the ages of 17 to 23, and prior to that was addicted to drugs and spent time in the care system. So I use those experiences strategically to bring myself into the space when I'm teaching for people of different ethnicities, different races, different religions, but also different experiences of where they come from, because I believe that bringing self interpersonally into teaching, into spaces, helps to reduce disparities and inequalities that students may see in university.
Okay, so this presentation is about the ongoing crisis of racism and anti-racism, particularly as that applies in universities, and developing and implementing new strategies to deal with new forms of racism. So the idea that racism adapts, shifts and changes over time and accommodates to new forms of society, education, policy and government is nothing new. But we've seen a particularly new form of racism since the 2008 financial crisis, and particularly since the 2016 Brexit vote and the rise of Donald Trump in the United States. In this historical context, some people might call it the post-truth era. We've seen particular attacks on anti-racist work. In and of itself is now presented as being racist. So there's a new form of racism known as anti-racism. And it's in this environment, which is an extension of, I guess, what some people would call the hostile environment, which was a phrase deliberately used by previous Tory governments, that we're talking about strategies to combat racism. So since at least 2010 and post the financial crash, we've seen a rise of public pedagogy, which is devoted almost in its entirety to dismissing anti-racist work. And much of this is focused on new forms or relatively new forms of academic work, such as critical race theory, updatings of the black radical tradition, but also, what informs our thought in critiquing this new form of public pedagogy is a whole host of critical perspectives on education, such as critical theory and critical pedagogy. For example, if we look at David Theo Goldberg's work, we see that critical race theory in and of itself has become the target of a whole host of right-wing media outlets. And the type of critical race theory that's caricatured in these outlets is designed to re-signify the meaning of critical race theory. So in the mind of the public now, any mention of CRT is seen as some extreme, reactionary, in itself racist view about racism and anti-racism. Now, this makes dealing with racism in educational contexts particularly problematic. So we know, if we look at critical theorists such as Herbert Marcuse, for example, that in order for diversity interventions in universities to be successful, they need to be pretty comprehensive and all-encompassing. So we can't have bolt-on interventions about decolonizing or anti-racist pedagogy or whatever. We need to immerse ourselves in those types of practices. So Marcuse argues in what he calls, he introduces a concept called repressive tolerance. Marcuse argues that in order to deal effectively with racism, for example, in educational settings, we can't just present little snippets of anti-racist practice. Doing that sets up that kind of discourse as some kind of extreme outside niche area of study, which further serves to alienate that from the mainstream. These kind of ideas have become more developed if we look at critical race theory, for example, where one of the main tenets is that racism is embedded to such an extent within Western societies and Western educational systems that we need to tackle that head on. We need to take a structural approach to calling out structural racism. Again, in the black radical tradition, we see that writers going back to the 80s like Cedric Robinson, for example, but more recently with Kehinde Andrews, where racism isn't seen as an anomalous, aberrational occurrence. It's embedded in the very political, economic, cultural, and social systems that we live in. Trying to present these ideas in any meaningful way in a university has become increasingly difficult because of the political climate now around racism and attitudes to anti-racist practice. In this presentation, what we're trying to do is take those fields of thought and provide some kind of autoethnographical accounts of how we're trying to operate within the political, socioeconomic and educational policy context that we've just described to drive forward anti-racist practice and anti-racist pedagogy. And I'm going to hand over to my colleagues now to talk through, from an autoethnographic point of view, their experiences and their accounts of what we've been doing around this.
Hi, my name's Adib and I'm a student at Leeds Trinity University, Level 6, Criminology with Police Studies.
Hi, my name's Hasnain. I'm Level 6, studying Criminology with Police Studies.
As we reflect on our time at LTU, we can recollect certain situations where there's been more than a dozen cases of racially aggravated and racially profiled cases against students within the university. Lecturers across the board, as well as staff alike, are seen to be privileged in a sense, where they feel as though they can speak to students in a certain way just because of the power they hold. Whilst they speak to students in this way, they come across as racist and arrogant. As we have experienced this firsthand, we can evidently say and conclude that this has a detrimental impact on the mental health of students and staff alike who have to deal with the situations, such as the security staff and the student support managers. In addition to this, one way in which the university can deal with this situation successfully and comfortably is by training all lecturers and senior members of staff in speaking and dealing with the situation comfortably, so that students and staff alike are both comfortable with the situation and happy, and so that no one is upset at the end of the situation.
My top tips for the awarding gap for staff is to allow students from institutions to give them support and training for the awarding gap and making a safer environment for students from every background to feel equal and safe in the institutions up and down the country, and to help them get the best award possible that they'll deserve.